It is the final word story time, 208. Yes, that's right. We've made this weekend history show of ours on 208 occasions.
Wow.
We're here for CBUS Super. We'll tell you more about them later. I'm Adam Collins with you as ever from London, and down the screen with me for the second time in 2 weeks. We spoke last week doing our issues-based weekly show. This time it's to talk about the history of the game. Bharat Sundaresan in Adelaide. Hello, Baz.
Hello, Connor. Before we even get going with nostalgia chat, let's stick to the present because I got a little gift from the man himself yesterday at the Adelaide Oval. And you're right, there you go. Glenn Maxwell, the showman, obviously co-written by someone I know really well and who I might be sharing the screen with. And it was gifted to me by the man himself, the man the book is about, Glenn Maxwell, who,
nice.
We took a couple of pot shots at each other. He yelled out, asking me to go home while I was helping out, as I always do, with Manas and Steve in the nets. And so when he was doing some promotional work outside, I obviously bugged him and bothered him as well. Like a tit for tat. But then I got a book in return. So it was good seeing Maxi after all this while.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad that worked out. I saw him take a couple of photos in the stands at Adelaide yesterday. Normally, we would start the show by telling you something about the number 208, but really, it's Glenn Maxwell Day today. 201. It was 12 months ago as we record when Glenn was doing his thing in Mumbai, the Mumbai Miracle, the 201 not out, the partnership with Pat Cummins, which is the hook that the book hangs off, really, the 12 months leading up to when he was able to perform those remarkable feats. So, I thought that this would be a nice, not time to reflect on that necessarily, but a nice time to remind people that Glenn is going to be on stage with us throughout the course of our live shows. All of those tickets are in the show notes. Would love you to buy some. Melbourne on the 29th. Let's just drill down on that one specifically. 29th of November, our biggest venue yet, the Capitol Theatre, on a Friday night. A big tilt from us trying to sell out a big venue and all the rest of it. That is Maxi's book launch. I don't want there to be any ambiguity around this. Maxi didn't have a book launch organised for him by his publisher in the usual way. We're taking on that responsibility in the same way that we took on the responsibility of doing all the PR for the book. We're doing the launch as well. So it is going to be on the 29th of November. Glenn will be there. You can buy a ticket and the book in that bundle we have going, that link that's in the notes. If somebody has already bought a ticket and wants a book as part of that bundle, just hold tight. There is going to be an email sent to you in the coming days, I believe, which will give you the ability to upgrade. But if you haven't yet bought a ticket, you'll essentially save $10 off the recommended retail price. So that is all available to do. But in Melbourne, which we are really branding as his book launch, you'll be able to see him on stage again, go through his paces with a special guest, which I'll announce next week. And you'll get to line up and have your book signed by him and have a selfie with him and do all the lovely things that he's very good at, because Glenn's excellent when I guess he's really good at appreciating why he's appreciated. He isn't one of these athletes who's aloof and funny with fans. Like Glenn gets it because he's a fan as well. He's a cricket badger as well. He feels that way when he sees people that he loves play the game and so on. That's, I guess, part of the reason why we've all become such good friends with him, because he's a real genuine human being. So 29 November in Melbourne, please be there. Please bring your friends, your cricket teammates, your office Christmas party, whatever it may well be. That is, 22 days away from when we're recording this, which seems staggering that we'll have a show in Perth between now and then on the 21st, and we'll have the Perth Test match to start the Border Gavaskar Trophy Series, which you and I, of course, will be doing for SEM Bharat.
Indeed.
So much going on at the moment. And before we move off Melbourne, I've got another announcement today as well, which I probably should have started with in hindsight, but here we go. Harsha Bhogle, your friend and mine, the great narrator of Indian cricket, he's going to be doing Brisbane with us. So if you're in Queensland, if you're in Brisbane, if you're going to be at the Brisbane Test 2 nights before, that's the 12th of December, so 2 nights before the Test match, we have Harsha Bhogle on stage. And I've done stage shows with Harsha before in other settings, and he's a terrific guest and very engaging, and I'm sure he'll take 100 selfies or 1,000 selfies with you if you wish as well. He's that kind of guy as well. So live shows ticking over beautifully. And today, being 12 months on from 201 not out, I thought that was the right time to give it another big push, Baz.
Indeed, why not? And I'll hold up the book yet again. So this is a book that you can get for yourself while you attend any of these live shows, but especially the one on the 29th, because like me, you can get it from Glenn Maxwell himself. It's nothing better
Mm,
than getting a book from the person who the book is about. So Glenn Maxwell handing out a book which
mm.
says Glenn Maxwell doesn't get better. And just on Harsha as well. Like, I mean, for all his commentary feats, stage shows is where he really comes to the fore, right? That's where he shines the most. So don't
Mm.
miss that either. And if you do go and meet Harsha, just start every question with, I just wonder. And you'll get the best answers.
And you'll be with us in Adelaide as well, Baz. I shouldn't wash over that. So you and Izzy will be part of our live show. I had Izzy on the weekly this week, and
Oh,
you'll
nice.
be there with us on stage doing your thing. So part of the wider Final Word cast and family that will be represented up there as we go around the country. So all the information in the show notes. Jump in, do your thing. Bads, I'm going to make this a bit of a I know that this is coming straight after the US election, and there might be an expectation that we might talk about that today. I'm going to leave all of that. It's an election-free zone, more or less, here at the moment.
Yeah.
Jeff's been over there doing his thing, and we will get Jeff back on the show. It's presumably next week. I'm not entirely sure what Jeff's intentions are, but at some stage, Jeff will return, and in doing so, we will have him to talk about his experiences of being in the States through the election. But yeah, obviously it's been a full-on couple of days. But let's use cricket and the history of the game as our distraction, and let's do that through the medium of Nerd Pledge, which is where you send in very kindly denominations of money which relate to cricket, and then we tell a story about the history of the game that we all love. It's the nicest thing we do. It's the warm jacket. It's the old pair of tracky dacks. It's the pair of slippers on a cold evening. That's what this show is to the Final Word. And there is nobody better to wax lyrical on that front than you, Baz. And you've got our first number today. It's from Riley Campbell. It's 700 in Australian dollars. Riley's been with us for a long time, so thank you, Riley, for upping your pledge here. There's no clue as such. Now, I mean, 700 with an Australian number, you immediately think about Shane Warne, I suppose, in his 700th Test wicket at the MCG on Boxing Day in 2006, that freezing cold day when Warney took Pfeiffer and bowled out England and got that milestone, knocking over Andrew Strauss. But I suspect you'll go broader than that, Baz. I'm looking forward to hearing where you land. Have fun.
Yeah, I mean, just on that Shane Warne thing, people forget that he got to 700 before Muthai Muralidharan did, right? And guess what? Like, I did as well. Like, so when I was looking up 700, I wanted to know who Muthai Muralidharan's 700th wicket was. And then it was like a reminder. You kind of, there's so many cricket stats to do the rounds. You kind of tend to forget these things, right? Like, and then it came to me that, oh yeah, Shane Warne was the first man to get to 700 Test wickets, and then Muralidharan got there and then went on to 800. But we're not going to talk about Shane Warne. We will stick to Australia, but we'll talk about someone who did well in Australia rather than an Australian who did something of note. And the guy I'm going to talk about is probably the most unheralded of the great era of that West Indian team. Especially when that West Indian team used to come and dominate. Well, they dominated everywhere. They dominated in England, in India, which everybody spoke of recently when they won 3-0 in India, which was the last team to win 3-0 in India before New Zealand, even though that was in a 5-match series. But the man who dominated Australia the most, and if you ask this question to a crowd of 1,000, unless you got a real cricket nuffy in there, I think 999 will probably guess one of Viv Richards, Gordon Greenwich, Desmond Haynes, or maybe even Richie Richardson, who does have a great record against Australia. 900s he made against us, against Australia. And don't forget, he also popped up on the Colo and Baz show a couple of years ago. Colo, how cool was that? When he spoke about his maroon hat. Yeah, what a time it was. But the guy that always flew under the radar, but had a lot of fans around the world, but people don't talk of him enough, is Larry Gomes. And when you look at numbers of batters who came to Australia and guys who did well, so anyone who played 8 Test matches or more, and I use 8 Test matches because 8 is a good number, and that's also the number of Test matches Larry Gomes played. And there are only 2 guys who played 5 or more Test matches in Australia above him. And we don't even have to mention them because Larry Gomes is the leader of the pack because he averaged 70 on Australian soil. And when you think of, him having played his cricket against the Lillee Thompson or in the Lillee Thompson era back-to-back times, and then also when Australia had others like Terry Alderman and Jeff Lawson, and the fact that he batted number 4 in a team which had like Richards above him and Lloyd below him. It's just a staggering stat to start with, and also tells you how important he was to that side. I mean, Mr. Dependable is the pretty lazy and boring nickname that was given to him, but I think he deserves a lot more plaudits than what people give him. Even though you obviously often hear Michael Holding or Viv Richards himself talk about how important he was, but I don't think the world has celebrated Larry Gomes enough, unless probably you grew up in that era and you were just one of those who liked the quirky character, the curly hair and everything else. Because again, you think of the West Indian era, and the first thing you think of is big sixes and big fours, and they were bullying everyone and intimidating everyone. We're talking about someone who never hit a six in Test cricket, right? You're talking about someone who had a good Test career, but not a great Test career, except when it came to batting in Australia and England. Probably the two most difficult places to bat in away from home for any other team. Average 70 in Australia, 56 in England, played some crucial innings there, and also got most of his test runs in Australia, against Australia and in Australia. So 6 of his 9 test hundreds are against Australia, and 4 of those are on Australian soil, starting in 1978. And then obviously he got, I think, 2 in 82-83, and 1978 is when he plays in Australia for the first time, but 2 in that 82-83 series and 2 in the 84-85 series. And also tells you how often West Indies used to come to Australia, the fact that they played 2 5-match series in the space of 3 years. But if you look at Larry Gomes' life and career, his thing against Australia started much earlier. When he's 16 years old, he plays in a schoolboy team against a schoolboy Australian team in Trinidad. And that Aussie team is pretty strong. It even has the likes of Gary Gilmore in it. And he makes 152. Is this lanky little kid from Trinidad, from a beautiful town called Arima, which I will come to earlier, which is a story which has nothing to do with Larry Gomes, but Arima, but that's me, so I will digress. Take it or leave it. If you're running a marathon, this is the best time to start doing that, because you're going to go for a run around Arima later. But yeah, that's where Larry Gomes is from. And so he makes his 152, doesn't make a great start in Test cricket. I think gets a pair, or at least he gets a duck in one of his first 2 innings in Test cricket. But then it's in Australia during the Packer series where he gets his place in the side again, that he comes and scores a lot of runs in Australia, looks the kind of player who could fit in. But again, he's dumped out of the team when all the big boys come back once Packer ends. And then he's picked for that 82-83 series in Australia when, he's scored a lot of runs in first-class cricket, and he forces his way back. And also at a time when West Indies realize, yes, we have all the swashbuckling players on top and down the order, but you need someone to hold everything together, the glue, and that becomes Larry Gomes, Mr. Dependable. And, obviously his favorite ground, he would say later, was the Adelaide Oval. I mean, whose favorite ground isn't the Adelaide Oval? So I have to say that. I don't know whether you heard my call when South Australia beat Victoria Colo. Like, I lost my voice and I made it sound like the greatest moment in the history of the world, but
I love it. I'm gonna have to. I read the scorecard and saw a few of the photographs of men around the bat, but I haven't heard the call. I'll go back and watch how you went.
Oh, you have to. I mean, rarely have you heard me lose my voice, but I do. Once again. Oh, appeal has been given. He's been given history here at the Adelaide Oval. Victoria no longer a bogey team for South Australia. Their first win in 9 long years, and it is Lloyd Pope. 6 wickets for the 24-year-old. That was dead plumb. What a moment to be a South Australian cricket fan.
I think you lost your voice. You lost your voice when we were on the... you lost your voice that last afternoon in Karachi. Remember, I had to use you for I think the last 60 minutes straight was you and me, and it was pretty fucking full on the end of that Test match. Because it doesn't look like it when you review the card now, but it did have kind of a 3 results from the table with half an hour to go kind of energy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you were so up and about that you lost. Well, I think we probably both lost our voices that day. They're happy memories. You and I being together there. I was thinking about it the other day that all things being equal, if we're doing Sri Lanka together, being on tour with you again and doing marathon commentary stints when we've run out of people, that'll be a high point of, well, I guess it's 29 January and 6 February, those test matches. I've booked my flights. I'm not sure where we're staying, Baz. Maybe we should work that out offline,
We should.
we'll sort something out.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, we are like the Larry Gomes of our commentary box, because we have all the big hitters all around us, and then you and I play a role in the middle quietly. I mean, not quietly. There's nothing quiet about you and me, but no, you have to go listen to it. Like, I mean, obviously there are clips mainly of the last 2 wickets that Lloyd Pope takes, but throughout that day, I was completely on fire. I had Tom Cooper with me as well, and like, I did this whole, I know we digress, but I did this whole build up for Tom Cooper to like jump on and match me for excitement, considering he was the only, I mean, he was playing when South Australia last beat Victoria 9 years ago. But I mean, I love Tom Cooper. It's great company, but he just played it down so much, and he kind of let me down. But anyway, I mean, he played it down much like Larry Gomes used to back in the day, after Gordon Greenidge was done, and before Clive Lloyd walked out to bat. And yeah, I mean, most of his hundreds were slow affairs. I think he would face an average of 350 balls to get there. So, like I said, in 82-83, he makes 100 in Adelaide and in Sydney. And then in 84-85, he once again comes back, makes a very famous 100 at the WACA, and then follows it up with another at the Adelaide Oval. But the 100 at the WACA, if you look at the scores for that match, pretty much nobody really scores too many runs. It's the first test of the series. I have no idea what Australia were doing by having the first test being played at the WACA against the West Indies. Maybe they just, maybe in that era, just before our time, obviously, we were born around that time, Colo. Australians just wanted the West Indies to beat them. I don't know. That's what it seems like, because it was an innings victory for the Windies, but it is Larry Gomes batting at, I think, 6 in that test match, comes in. Nobody else is like scoring runs around him, but he just bats and bats and bats and grinds the Aussies down. A good Australian attack as well, and makes what many believe was his best 100. Even though he's always felt his 100 against India and Trinidad was his favorite knock. But that innings really sets up the series for them, and then he comes back towards the end of the series and seals it for them with 100, his final 100 or if not of his career, definitely against Australia and in Australia, and ends up with it's incredible. 8 test matches, an average of 70, not having hit a 6 in Australia, while being spoken of as being probably the 6th best batter in the side, or maybe at times even the 7th behind Jeff Dujon. Yeah, I mean, it's quite a career, Larry Gomes, and his books just come out in September. I didn't know, but like, it's come out. So yep, and I think maybe we should get our hands on it. There you go.
Christmas competition.
Larry Gomes, yeah.
So, Jimmy Anderson and Larry Gomes together at last. An ideal dinner party, right there. That not duo, not trio, quadrant, yeah, whatever it is. Those 4 together, having a bit of food would be very nice. Just looking back at some of these cards as well, by the way, you took me by surprise when you said how often or how long he batted for his hundreds. That innings at Perth that you referred to in 1984, he was out there for 472 minutes. That's a proper marathon for 127. Yep. That was in the first test of the series, and then 120 not out. He was out there, well, striking a bit quicker there, but still, these were marathon efforts. Because when I think of Larry Gomes, maybe it's due to his Portuguese extraction. I kind of think of this languid cricketer who, and he was a stroke player clearly, but a stroke player who, I guess he was resistant most of the time. He demonstrated great judgment to not end up in strife against a pretty good Aussie attack, especially in the early 80s when Lillee was still there.
Yeah, but if you read about him, and he's been a very reticent character in terms of doing interviews. I remember the first couple of times I went to the Caribbean, I reached out to him, and both times I think he was one of those, though. I called the number. This is way back when, in 2011. I called him and said, "Hello, Larry here." I said, "Oh, Mr. Gomes, my name is Bharat. I'm from the Indian Express. I've come all the way from India. I was wondering if you'd give me an interview." Who do you want to talk to? I said, Mr. Gomes, you, Larry. Like, oh, no, this is the wrong number. And he kept the phone. So, well, I don't have great memories with Larry Gomes myself, but it's happened to, I think if you've been a journalist long enough, I'm sure you made those kind of calls when somebody doesn't want to give you an interview. And then later on, I found out he's doesn't do many interviews, but the few he has given around the book. So if ever you wanted to interview him, this is the time. Call him. Maybe we should get him on the show. Best time. Maybe promote.
I
his
wouldn't mind
book.
doing that. We've done quite a few. We're going back into that era a little bit of late. So, Larry Gomes. Well, we're going to be. I don't know whether we'll be in Trinidad in June and July. My sources tell me we're not going to Trinidad when we go to those 3 test matches, which I think are going to start 3rd week of June. Again, this is all speculative at the moment, but. Still, I suppose there's a chance Gomes might be there watching a game of cricket. If he is, we should get him on the final word. Thank you, Baz. An average of 70 against Australia in Test cricket. Larry Gomes, nice place to start our episode today. That was for Riley Campbell. I'm going to jump in and take our break. I'm going to get there early. Sometimes I think it's in the interest of the show to get the break out the way. On the way through to it, we're back with CBUS Super, Baz. I'm not sure if you picked this up the other day when I was talking with Izzy, but it's a lovely thing that we've got CBUS Super back on board for another summer. They've been terrific supporters of Jeff and mine since we started doing this in a more dedicated way through 2018 and 2019. It's their 40th birthday, right? So that of itself is significant, and that's part of the story we've been telling about their long-term commitment to the retirement savings of Australians. But when you get into the nitty-gritty, one of the things that we often come back to is their competitive fees. So what this means is you only charge the admin and investment fees needed to manage your account, which means that they meet the test of only being run to benefit members, which is a calling card of all industry super funds. That means that fees and costs are as low as possible, and any profits go to members, not shareholders. So that means members save more. And recently, CBUS have lowered their weekly admin fee as well. So that'll be the type of thing that we tell the story of through the course of the next 4 or 5 months with CBUS Super. An average return of 8.87 per year since its inception 40 years ago. That's with the default My Super account. So strong results for members, always in the interests of members as a great industry super fund. Jump on cbussuper.com.au. Tell them that we sent you. We don't need to necessarily tell them that we sent you. You can if you wish to. Their extraordinary past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance, but we're very proud to be with them. And if you haven't got your super sorted out, and I get it, by the way, there was a long time when I was working in jobs where I really should have had my shit together. But for one reason or another, life gets on top of you and you end up with a multitude of super accounts and you don't really know what's what. You don't know which ones are with the for-profit banks, essentially, and you don't know which ones are the industry funds. Go to CBUS, tell them you want to get your act together. They'll do it for you, and they do terrific work. So thank you to them for being with us again. I hope you've got your super sorted out, Baz. And if you haven't, I know how we can get that fixed through the summer.
I know, and also on CBUS Super, they have a great TV advert as well these days. So I watch it quite often on, I don't know what channel it is on, but it always just pops up, and it's got that whole hard yakka kind of footage, like, it's this old 1970s footage of some Australian tradies working on top of a building under construction. So, you're right. If you haven't got your super yet, CBUS Super are the way to go, and just watch that TV advert. Like, you would want to get your super sorted once you see that.
All right, final word story time. We'll be back in a sec. Adam Collins, Bharat Sundaresan, story time 208, and I'm up next. I said that we weren't going to do much politics today, and we're not, strictly speaking. However, this is a political adjacent answer for Jonathan Brand. Jonathan, who has been with us for a long time as well, in Stirling, so GBP 205, tells me here it's not related to cricket, but in many ways more connected to my previous line of work, which again is that political hook there from Jonathan. So I suppose it is on brand to have this cricket politics crossover right now. And I was fairly convinced from the outset this was going to be in relation to the Prime Minister's 11 fixtures. And look, this was something I had a fair bit to do with my time in the PM's office. So I thought I might tell a couple of stories from that era off the top. I figured that the statute of limitations is removed from my telling some political stories, by the way. I last week got into when Matthew Hayden was offered an opportunity to run for Parliament when I was deployed to Queensland to see whether he would run for a marginal seat, which lasted about 2 seconds when his manager at the time told me that wouldn't be happening. But stories of that era that a fun pub chat, but I think some of them can be told more widely now. For instance, when the time that I was running the PM's 11, which was quite a good time, 2 seasons. This was when my job in there had expanded to sports. I was doing lots of political stuff, and I was a media advisor. But by 2009, late 2008, 2009, I was looking after sport for Rudd as well as a policy area, and doing a lot of the work and stakeholder work and that kind of thing. So that meant that I actually went to the 2008 Olympic Games with the PM and sat next to him at the swimming, which I remember well. Not just going, but being part of that amazing event. And then I remember I wrote the speech for the opening of the Victor Trumper stand in 2008 at the SCG. That was December 2008. I remember it was the day my great mate Don Malacy got married to his beautiful wife Jess. I was sort of following how Rudd was going when I was at that wedding with that speech, but that was a nice early moment. And various fascinating little bits and pieces like you'd be well aware of the Tasmanian AFL team that's now a thing, which is great, and hugely supportive of it. That came ever so close to becoming federal government policy around 2009 and 2010, when the government at the time, and Rudd specifically as PM, he was trying to engineer it that the government would basically place a team in Tasmania. The AFL were less keen on that, and it didn't get over the line at the time. But, it's an emblem of the way in which sport can be used creatively in these situations. There was the Football World Cup bid. This is before your time living in Ozbaz, but the Men's Football World Cup, there was an announcement made in February 2008. I remember it well. We went to the A-League Grand Final on a Sunday afternoon. And earlier in the week, there was the suggestion that we should find something to announce while we're at this grand final. And yes, it was very quickly turned around that we were going to do a bid for the Football World Cup, which was announced there with Frank Lowy, who was the chairman of the Football Federation of Australia at the time. And they were in the cart. And so it went, and there was this bid made for I think it was the 2018 or 2022 bids were being done concurrently. So by 2009, when I was playing more of a hand on the sports stuff, they did this launch of they turned the Queen's Hall at Parliament House, or is it King's Hall? One of them's King's Hall, one of them's Queen's Hall. I can never quite remember, Spring Street or Canberra. But anyway, the major hall in there at Canberra Parliament House was turned into a mini football stadium, and it was all singing, all dancing formal launch of the bid. And I had the great pleasure of being sat next to Les Murray, who was the voice of Australian football forever, and getting his take in real time on how it was all going. And he was very excited about it, the late, great Les Murray. So, there were all of these various interesting things I got to do, which was related to my day job in sport. And one of them was the PM's 11. And my favourite little anecdote from that, well, there's two. One is Nathan Lyon, who I've written about this before, so this is something that I've joked about with Nathan too. I was playing club cricket at the same club as Nathan, who was a 21-year-old off-spinner at the time. He was club captain and making his way, playing for the ACT Comets in what was then known as the Cricket Australia Cup, which was the second 11 competition. And there was one spot that theoretically was picked by the PM, and that was to be the person from the ACT side. And that season, the teammate at the club at Westies, a bloke called Ben Oakley, was bowling up a storm. He was bowling so well that he ultimately got a Big Bash contract. And he was given that nod to play in the PM's 11 against the West Indies, not Nathan. But Nathan was working at Manuka, rolling the pitches at the time and developing his career on curation and so on, as is well known. And going up there for the toss that very hot morning in Canberra, I remember going to Nathan, just sort of saying to him, how do you reckon it'll play today? And he made some oblique reference to the fact that given he wasn't picked, there was no one's going to get a fucking wicket today. And so it proved with Gale making like a 75 ball, 140 or something ridiculous, and everybody going around. So that's a nice memory that relates to the current Australian team. And I think it was the year after. I reckon it was the year after. Was where, or it might have been the same year. Either way, Matthew Hayden was captaining the PM's side, which was related to the story I told last week. But before that, must have been just before that, we were at the MCG doing what you normally would do with the politicians going around doing their spots in the commentary box. As we know, Bharat, each year we now see Anthony Albanese, used to be Scott Morrison, and it's a tradition at Sydney that the politicians come through. Well, in Rudd's era, he liked doing it during the Melbourne Test match and going down to the Boxing Day match, usually on day 2, I think it was, where we would go down and I'd accompany him in that. And he used to love chatting with Warney. The two of them got on famously. I love the fact that they used to text each other, with Warney's history, texting and so on. I thought it was quite funny that he and Rudd would text from time to time. And in doing so, Rudd, having met Warney, at the cricket, offered him the chance to captain the PM's 11 that year. And he called me and said, I want you to put in place a series of steps to make Shane Warne the captain of my team this year. The problem was we'd already put out a press release saying it was going to be Haydos. So we had to kind of get him to write back to Warney saying, sorry, I fucked up. You can do it next year. Now, as it turns out, there was no next year because Rudd wasn't the Prime Minister when January 2011 rolled around. But yeah, I always like that idea of him and Warney concocting a scheme to make him, effectively come in. Well, no, he was still playing Big Bash, wasn't he? But to be playing in a Prime Minister's 11 again. So they were all really happy memories of my time in Canberra, one of the best days of the year. The PMs, and by the way, just on that Football World Cup bit, I shouldn't brush over the fact that I reckon Australia having a tilt at that, it was quite embarrassing only getting one vote and all the government money that was put into that and all the speculation about how that might have come to pass. The Women's World Cup that was held in Australia, was it last year before?
Last year.
2023, I think it was. That can't be unrelated to the fact that Australia put the groundwork in for a Men's World Cup bid. So I think that, that there was a knock-on. Australia having the ambition to want to host a tournament like that, unsuccessful as they were, it can't be completely divorced from the fact that the women had that tournament, which was such an extraordinary success with the viewing numbers and Australia making it all the way to the semi-final. So just that last technical point, if you like, on the way through. Back to the PM's 11, where, again, I thought this answer might take me to from Jonathan Brand. It first started in 1951. That was a fixture when Bob Menzies was PM against the West Indies. And they weren't played every year. It was kind of an occasional game. So there was one in 1954, one in 1959, one in 1961, which was, of course, the Calypso summer. And then the next one was played early in 1963. And this took me down a little bit of a wormhole, Baz, which you'll appreciate, because this was famously Don Bradman's last game of serious cricket. So you go back on his Cricket Archive tab. I never thought to do this, but the Don Bradman miscellaneous tab on Cricket Archive's got some quite interesting fixtures that didn't have first-class status. All those games that he played in America in the winter of 1932, for example, most of them bob up on there. The story that we've told before, it was his quasi-honeymoon, playing 4 months of cricket or 5 months of cricket in the US pretty much every single day. He was over there making bank and making runs and taking wickets too. But in 1948 is the previous game in his miscellaneous tab, and that was the last non-first class fixture they played on the Invincibles tour against Scotland at Aberdeen, and of course Bradman made 123 not out, which won't surprise you. It wasn't his last first class game though. They came back from the 1948 trip to England and played a couple of testimonial games for Bradman in 48-49, and one of them was a tie. Now, you consider that there have been like 50,000 first-class games. I think there have been 67 or 68 ties ever, and one of them was in Bradman's penultimate first-class game. It was the Bradman 11 against the Hassett 11. The Hassett 11 made 406 and 430, with the captain himself making 102 in the second innings. Lindwall got 100 in the first. And Bradman's 11, again, that number, 123 for the Dom. So his last first-class century was playing in a team named after himself. And then, it was a tie. It was 9 out, all out, the Bradman 11 the second time around. I'm not sure why there wasn't a 10th batter, but nevertheless, that was played at the MCG. So something quite quirky there right at the end of Bradman's career. And then his final first-class game, just after he was knighted in early 1949, he made 30 in the first dig, playing for South Australia. Then fielding, he stepped on a ball. So the last first-class scorecard entry for Bradman in the March of 1949 was Bradman at number 11, absent injured. So he didn't actually bat in his last entry, because they batted fourth in that game, South Australia, was that he wasn't on the field at all. So stepping on the ball. So, 30 first time around and DMB the second time around. So I suppose that, and that was it, right? He didn't play any other cricket in the intervening years. I mean, I'm not sure whether he might have played cricket that didn't make that miscellaneous tab that I referred to before, but I reckon any game that Bradman was listed in would have had that quasi status. So I wanted to provide that context to how him being invited to play and captain Bob Menzies' PM's 11 in early 1963 was quite significant because it was literally the first time that people had seen the greatest batter ever turn out in a game of cricket for 14 years, and by that stage he's well into his mid-50s.
Yeah, I guess the only game
So
I can think of that he might have played is here and in Adelaide. I shouldn't say here anymore. I don't live in Norwood anymore, but when we were very close to Kensington Oval, because that's where he played his last game. Right, they still have the plaque, and apparently thousands of people were around him, which is like next door to his house in 2 Holden Street. So you can kind of he could have exited his house and just there's a gate or like an entrance to Kensington Oval. So that's I think the last competitive game he played could have been before this Prime Minister's 11 game you talk about.
It's a good point. I hadn't considered that. There would have been, and Andrew Faulkner, I'm sure, would have documented that in his book, The History of the Kensington Cricket Club, which Andrew Faulkner, who was our great colleague from the Australian, doesn't work in cricket anymore, but brilliant cricket writer and someone who I had a wonderful time touring with, sitting around talking about footy from the 80s and the 90s, and before, in his case, he's an encyclopedia on all of that. So, but yeah, back to 1962-63 and this MCC game, as it turned out. MCC against the PM's 11. The visitors made 253 for 7 declared. It sounds like the kind of the games I now play for MCC. Feels like every game I play, we end up getting about 250 odd for something declared before we have a bowl in the afternoon after into the middle session. Ted Dexter was captaining MCC that day, which wasn't unusual given he was the England captain of the day. And Bradman was coming in at number 5 in that chase, and he was bowled by Brian Statham for 4. So he didn't make much of a contribution with the bat. Australia fell 3 runs short. They made 250. David Allen took a fifer. I only mention him because he came up on Storytime very recently via Jeff, and he was a feature of the book Richie Benno's Blue Suede Shoes, which I am very happy to announce, given we featured it on Book Club earlier in 2024, that it was given the gong as the Cricket Writers Club Book of the Year on Tuesday, which is quite the honour. So well done to the authors for that recognition. But yes, David Allen was part of that story at Manchester 1961, as he was at Canberra in 1963. And then they played 2 more of these, Baz, in 1964 and 1965, and it just stops dead. And unsurprisingly, it's brought back to life by cricket lover Robert James Lee Hawke, Bob Hawke, when he became PM. We've talked quite a bit about Hawkey recently, the top edge into his glasses. The 40th anniversary of that was a couple of weeks ago. We did a segment on the show about it at the time when they played a game in Canberra to commemorate the 40th anniversary of that weird moment in political history and cricket history in Australia before the double dissolution election that year. But in January 84, so he was elected on the 5th of March 83, so 9 months into his tenure. I know that because that was the day my parents were married, Baz. They got married, they voted for Bob Hawke in the morning and got married in the afternoon on the day they, on that date. So I never forget the day Hawke was elected. But yeah, they're playing the Windies, that great West Indian team that you were talking about in your first answer. And I remember as a kid, it was one of those games that Channel 9 would show the highlights of when it rained. And the reason they did that was because I mentioned Bradman's last game was the PM's 11. Well, the way it was built up was that this was the last game for Australia for Dennis Lillee. So even though it was the PM's team and not an official Australian team, the way it was branded was like an Australian 11, right? So Lillee opening the bowling for the Bob Hawke PM's 11, but it was kind of like it was seen as an Australian game. It was a full strength Australian team. It was a real game of cricket. He'd only finished his Test career 3 weeks earlier, as we all know, a wicket with his final ball in Test cricket at Sydney, retiring with Rod Marsh and Greg Chappell while he was playing this game here at Manuka in Canberra. A game where Australia made 280 for 5 up against Holding and Garner, taking the new ball. So a proper attack. So a great effort in context to get to that very high score, bearing in mind that no one got to 300 odd in one day as back then. Gomes, you mentioned before, Larry Gomes, he made 45 and he was run out. I thought I should note there, Baz, given you were talking about him before. But from an Australian perspective, the end of the career for Dennis Lillee, the very start of the career for David Boone. David Clarence Boone, given we're using middle names today. He made 134 from 136 balls, so rapid fire innings as a 23-year-old. And that was the final push that Booney needed to get himself into the one-day team, where he made his official Australian debut a couple of weeks later, also against the West Indies. So there's the Lillee story, there's the Boone story, all weaving through that day in the PM's 11 in January 84. A stunning day. I remember, again, it was a beautiful day watching the highlights of this festival feeling, as it often is at Canberra, before they had the grandstands up with people scattered around the boundary line. All there to watch Dennis Lillee bowl. And sure enough, Lillee finishes with the analysis of 2 for 21 from 10, of course. And just as it was in his test career, the final ball he bowled here for this particular Australian 11 brought a wicket when he picked up Michael Holding, bowling out the visitors for 228 for the PM's 11 to win by 52 runs. So it's still a game that's played, Brett. The PM's 11 actually had first-class status in the last 2 years. I think you were there, weren't you, for the Tajnarine Chanderpaul 100 a couple of years ago or something like that. Was that 2 years ago when they played a 4-day game? Might have been last summer. A 4-day game at Canberra.
Yeah, pink ball game, wasn't it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Pink ball game, that's right. Yeah. So they've been able to use the fixture creatively. Occasionally it's been a T20. But this year it's actually a 2-day match, so a bit of a throwback to an earlier era. That, of course, won't have first-class status with India visiting Canberra on the 30th of November and the 1st of December. So between the first and the second test matches across a weekend. So there you go. That's all ahead of us this year for the PM's 11. But I have since learnt that when I went to Jonathan and said, I've done all this PM's 11 research and none of the scorecards are spitting out 205 for me. He's like, no, you're on the wrong track. Think about this, think about that. I'm like, right. Yes, he told me to consider American politics in a TV show. And, well, we got there because 205 could be interpreted as season 2, episode 5 of The West Wing. Now, this is not the first time we've used seasons and episodes as a way of solving a nerd pledge answer. We did it some years ago with The Nanny, the TV show The Nanny, which you probably didn't get in India when you were a kid. Or did you? Was The Nanny a show that you knew when you were a little boy?
No, not as a little boy, but I think I was made aware of it much later. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is the second time we've been able to use season and episode to solve our clue, and this relates to the ep where the president's counsel, legal counsel, Lionel Tribby, who's played by John Larroquette, storms into the Oval Office with a cricket bat in his hand. He's dismayed about the hiring of a Republican lawyer to work for him. Ainsley Hayes is the character's name, and yes, he goes like the problem with Sorkin shows is he never wrote women characters particularly well. So there's a couple of quite sexist lines in there, and when he goes in and addresses Martin Sheen, who plays the president, Jed Bartlett, but yes, he declares that he's been given this cricket bat by Elizabeth Windsor, the Queen of England, and all the rest of it. And it's all quite funny that he's having this rant at the fictional president and the chief of staff about a staffing appointment carrying a bat over his shoulder, the way you might walk off the field if you've just made 100. There are many cricket references through the West Wing, but I don't want to steal the thunder here of Jared Kimber. Jared Kimber's done this so well that it would be disingenuous for me to praise you this. He did a 15-minute YouTube video about Aaron Sorkin and cricket references maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So I can direct anyone who's interested in this to go back and watch it and dig through on YouTube. But yes, this particular cricket reference that relates to Lionel Tribby was in season 2, episode 5, and it's surely to their credit. There's that Gilbert and Sullivan bit at the end from Pinafore. He is an Englishman, where it's all very unrealistic how a political office really works. But nevertheless, I suppose that's why we watch The West Wing, because it is a departure from reality, and yes, cricket to that extent as well in weeks like this, as we distract ourselves from the very real threat of a nuclear apocalypse. So yes, that's me for Jonathan Brand 205. That's my answer, which ties together cricket, PM's 11s, politics, and cricket bats in the West Wing. So there you go.
Yeah, and just on the PM's 11, you said the next PM's 11 game will be India versus the PM's 11, but we kind of did cover a test match last year, Colo, which felt like a PM's 11 game in Ahmedabad. Both PMs were there.
Oh
They
yeah,
both raised the arms of
yeah,
their respective captains and also delayed the toss. So, I mean, we've all spoken and written a lot about that day, but
yeah.
I think India's version of a PM's 11 game is very different to Australia's version of a PM 11 game. And I only bring it up because
Eh,
it's going to be against an Indian team this time that Anthony Albanese's team will be up against. So it'll be interesting to see how that
mm.
plays out. And who knows, maybe we might have some political presence from India as well for that game. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens.
Yeah, it's a good point. I saw the Indian Prime Minister very excited about the result of the US election with his own social media posting yesterday, which I suppose is to be expected. Anyway, I promised we wouldn't go into too much depth on that. So I'll go straight to the next number, which is you, Baz. You've got about, I'll say you've got 13 minutes to answer it to make
All
sure
right,
we get
cool.
in before the next break. It's for Richie B. 451. That's again another Australian dollar number. Richie's new to the crew, so great to have you with us. Now, this is a free hit from Rich Baldwin. Now, Rich was very much part of our Edinburgh trip earlier this year. He's British himself. He's pledged in AUT, but he's lives over here. He took these beautiful photos all weekend, which were so appreciated of what we did up in Edinburgh, including about 20 of my daughters and me. And he sent them through. I was quite emotional looking at them yesterday. Had nothing
Yeah.
to do with the fact that I've been up all night watching the aforementioned results come in. But yeah, he sent some gorgeous photos that I don't think he realised he was like taking these candid shots of me at a cafe with the girls, and yeah, they were so nicely done. So thank you, Rich, and really hopeful that he'll be up with us again in Edinburgh for the Lord's Tabs next year. We're in the middle of recruitment for that right now. In fact, I should probably note that last year the marathon and half marathon, the registrations shut like quite probably in January. So if this is on your radar, please get in touch with me very soon. We really want to get 75 runners for the Tabs. The final word got a shout out, a very kind recognition, a very kind shout out at the Cricket Writers Lunch the other day about all the money that we raised for the Tabs through this London, there is London, but also Edinburgh Marathon process each year. So we'd love to have more people coming. If you've never done it before, it's so much fun. I'm having lunch with one of our marathon runners later today, actually. So this is the time to get on board. Drop me a note. Raising money for such a great charity who we're so proud to be in association with. So maybe this could be your inspiration to do that. Richie B, 451, free hit. Baz, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't aware that Richie is based in England, but I went with the AUD. And look, you said earlier when you see 700 in AUD, you immediately think of Shane Warne's 700th wicket at the MCG. Similarly, when you see 451 in AUD, you immediately think of Bradman Ponsford, don't you? Like, that's just the most
Yes.
obvious Australian number. And I know you touched on it in a previous show. I wasn't even surprised that you would have. But just a couple of things on that. Has any other cricketer in history ever bookended their careers with record-breaking feats than Bill Ponsford, right? And what a way to go out
Ponsford,
as
yeah.
well. Like starts his career with a 400. And Bradman's always plays a role, right? Or Bradman plays a role in terms of like catching up with him or doing something with him. And then obviously is the only batter to make two 400s in first class cricket. But
Yep.
also two test matches before the 451, they break the record for the highest partnership. They go past 388, which was Jack Hobbs and Wilfred Rhodes, I think, opening the batting at some point for England. And then two test matches later, they put on 451. Bill Ponsford makes 266, his highest score, and at 34 says, yeah, you know what, I'm done with cricket, and moves on. And that's extraordinary when you think of it, right? In an era where people go on and
Yeah.
on and on, and which has always happened in cricket and even back then. But I just thought we had to mention Bill Ponsford and, in a lesson on how to go out on a high.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, his state record is even more absurd. I think he averaged 75 for Victoria or something like that. And yeah, at test level, an all-timer as well, 7 centuries. And I think what's misunderstood about the 1934 Ashes is that I think most people just assume in the Bradman series of 1930 and 1934, those record-breaking series, that Australia just smashed the shit out of England. It wasn't quite like that. Like England win that test by an innings at Lords. It's 1-1. I mean, the third test match at Manchester's a draw. And then the fourth test match where Bradman makes his second triple century at Leeds is also a draw. So it's all to play for because England won in 32-33. If that final test match at the Oval is a draw, that's England retained the series. So it retained the Ashes, sorry. So, there was jeopardy there. So, I mean, you think of a record-breaking stand like 451 and you think about Australia making 700 and you think about Ponsford making 266 and Bradman 244, I want to say, but something like that. Anyway, whatever it was, you might fall into you might assume that it's a bit like it was in 1938 where they're batting for days and days. This was a test where Australia needed to make things happen. And I guess by applying all that scoreboard pressure and ultimately scoring more than 1,000 runs in the test match because they made 300 plus the second time around. And it was all that scoreboard pressure that gave them the chance to win by more than 500 runs and regain the Ashes in England, which was a massive deal. They didn't regain the Ashes in England again until 1989. So a record-breaking thing. But I just wanted to note that 34 has more going on than I think most people remember just with the way that the Bradman aura sits over the top of those two series.
Yeah, absolutely. And though I didn't stop there, though, 451 seemed a very obvious thing. I thought I had to mention it. And the rest of my answer is slightly random, but I am random. We are random, Colo. That's what we enjoy most about this. And I went down a 4 for 51 rabbit hole in one-day cricket, right? And so 4 for 51 figures, like bowling figures. There have been quite a few. But then I just went through the 4 for 51 bowling figures in matches involving Australia. And there have been 6 occasions. The last two, happened very recently in 2019 in the World Cup, where I think Trent Bolt finished with 4 for 51. And there was another recent 4 for 51, which I didn't focus on. But the first 4, and I think this is also inspired by the first Pakistan-Australia ODI, which felt like such a throwback to the 90s, and just the pace at which they were batting. That was the day South Australia beat Victoria, so I was just paying attention to the scores on my phone in between my commentary, and I saw Pakistan were 4 for 90 in 25 overs, and I was like, wow, is it 1997 again? And that's the reason I'm even talking about 4 for 51 here, because of those four occasions where 4 for 51 were recorded in a match ODI involving Australia, for some reason Australia had rather odd opening partnerships in all of them. So the latest happened in 2012 when David Warner opened with David Hussey. I didn't realize David Hussey ever opened in one-day cricket. That was the only time he opened in one-day cricket. Right. He made 43 in 45 balls. Good start, you would think, for someone opening for the first time, but never opened again and never really played much of ODI cricket after that, I would think. The one previous to that was a very early David Warner-Matthew Wade partnership, I think in 2010, which is kind of odd. You don't think of Matthew Wade in that 2010 era at all. It almost feels like Matthew Wade came onto the scene in 2015 onwards, plays Test cricket and all of that. But I thought Matthew Wade and David Warner was odd. And the one previous to that, I think, is 2009, I'm going to say, when Shane Watson and a young Brad Haddin, we don't mention young Brad Haddin too often on any show, but it was, again, you'd never think of Watson and Haddin as an opening partnership, do you? But even though throughout the 2011 World Cup, Brad Haddin did open and had a good run at that. And I think of all those random openers I mentioned, he probably has the best record as ODI opener. But the match I want to talk about, and I think this is because we are on this nostalgia ODI run, is it happens in probably my favorite tri-series from the 90s. I don't know where it ranks for you, Adam. It's the Australia, South Africa, New Zealand one in 97-98. I thought that was fabulous, like how close those games were. That famous South Africa New Zealand match, and has some of the best matches you'll ever see, right? So, and this particular
there's the little postscript to that, by the way, before you get into it, is we've talked about the extraordinary finish at Brisbane before. The South African kit is the red kit with the green shirt, the red, more dominant red than green. And it's Dan Gallen, it's his white whale, our colleague and journalist friend he lives near me here in London as well, but very proud South African. We had him on the show after the World Cup final this year, and he was borderline on tears afterwards. I love Dan. He's such a passionate, capable guy. And he has been searching for that shirt for his whole life, in the same way that I've been after them in Australia A-top from 94, 95 for my kind of whole life. And after writing an article in The Guardian reflecting on this, one emerged, but it was in Australia. So it's currently sitting in my parents' place in rural Victoria. This top that I'm going to retrieve for him when I'm back in at my parents' place over Christmas. I want to get it and stick it in my luggage so that Dan will have that in his safe possession by mid-January. So sometimes when you tell the world about your vulnerability, it comes out okay, and so it did for Dan in this.
Yeah, I'm going to do the same. Like how to find the white whale for me, but this particular ODI. So this is the 9th match of that tri-series. So some epic things happen. So I'll finish off the 4 for 51. So Shane O'Connor, you remember him, the lankiest fast bowler I've ever seen in my life. Yeah, I used to swing the ball, big hoop.
Hooped it.
Before he was the 90s Trent Bolt, wasn't he? He used to bowl these big hooping in swingers, left hammer, and he was pretty similar action as well. Maybe Trent Bolt looked up to Shane O'Connor. Who knows? We should ask him someday. So he takes 4 for 51. New Zealand are smashed. However, this is the top 3, and I think if people, unless you obviously remember this match really well, this is probably the oddest top 3 for Australia ever in their ODI history, because opening the batting for Australia in that game, remember I spoke about odd, strange bedfellows at the top of the order, were Jimmy Marr on debut and Stuart Law. So if you think that is strange in itself, Jimmy Marr and Stuart Law, 2 Queenslanders at the top, batting at 1 down was one of our favorite traders, Ian Harvey. So it's like that was Australia's top 3. And, so Jimmy Marr on debut makes 8, knocked over by Shane O'Connor, first wicket. Ian Harvey also knocked out by Shane O'Connor. I'm assuming Ian Harvey was the pinch hitter, and this was 97-98 was the peak pinch hitter era of one-day cricket, wasn't it? So those are Shane O'Connor's first 2 wickets. And just look at the rest of the batting lineup before I get to the highlight of this game. So it's Jimmy Marr, Stuart Law, Ian Harvey. Ricky Ponting top scores 84, has a partnership with Darren Lehman after O'Connor blows the top away with who makes 52, Darren Lehman. Michael Bevan at 6, a very young Adam Gilchrist at 7. And then Australia's bowling attack, Tom Moody, Paul Rifle, and blocker Paul Wilson, and the great late Shane Warne in his first ever ODI as captain. So, so much has happened in this game.
Yes.
And it's such a 1997 Australian team, isn't it? Like Stuart Law, Jimmy Marr opening, Ian Harvey at 1 down, Paul Wilson and Paul Rifle taking the new ball, with Tom Moody as the in between with Ian Harvey. A lot of Darren Lehman, I'm sure, with the ball, and Shane Warne as captain for the first time. I know it's about 4 for 51 and Shane Connor 4 for 51, but I'm just so intrigued by this Australian batting lineup.
You're right to be. It is. I mean, it's fond for me. That's the end of my year 7, year into year 8. So I probably watched every ball of this and probably scored most of it as well and got many fond memories. But you're right. Warne comes in as captain and ends up getting the job for the entirety of the tri-series the following summer in 98-99. So this was the first chance he got to do it. But he was an excellent one-day captain, Warne. He was well suited to it because it was before T20, so anything creative, that was the platform for it. So yes, not surprised to hear he was there, but yeah, that's classic Australia. They didn't have a particularly good couple of years in one-day cricket following the 1996 World Cup. That was a rough time. I don't think they made in 96-97, they missed out on the tri-series final, is my recollection. It was the Windies and Pakistan made it through to the top 2.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and then they do well in 97-98, but it's a competitive series, that's for sure. And 98-99 they do really well, but there's a little bit of recalibration as they start to go into separating the squads. They'd never done the separate the squads thing, and it was really controversial when they did it. It was like, what? You're going to have a one-day squad that's not the same as the test squad? What is going on here? But this was that period when there was, I guess, to an extent, some white ball specialisation in 97-98.
And also, this was also the first ODI in 11 years without one of the Watt twins in it. I think Mark Waugh had a viral fever and Steve Waugh had an injury, which is why Shane Warne is captaining. So, many historic things happened in this ODI, including probably like the oddest, one of the oddest in modern era. I mean, I don't. There must have been many of those in the 70s and 80s, but 90s onwards, probably the oddest opening combination in Jimmy Marr and Stuart Law. But yeah, and also Shane Warne as captain for the first time. No Watt wins. And yeah, a pace bowling attack, if you want to call it, of Paul Rifle, Paul Wilson, Tom Moody, and Ian Harvey. But Shane Warne holding himself back. He was the fifth bowling option. So I hear the crowd had to wait for a long time to see Warney bowl his first ball as captain. So, but anyway, I mean, New Zealand gets smashed. Shane O'Connor's 451 have no value, but value for us. We're talking about this game all these years later.
The Blocker Wilson thing before we move off him, I have a great recollection of when there was a TV show, Baz, before like there was the latitude to have panel shows and that kind of thing, like the early days of cable television. There was a station called C7, right? And C7 was on Optus, but it was simulcast on Ozstar, which was one of the, I don't know, it may still exist, I'm not sure. It was what you watch in rural areas. And I lived in rural Victoria for a time, and that meant I got to watch the Shield match of the round. And Kerry O'Keefe was a commentator on that, right? And he also used to host this show on C7, or was one of the panels with Gavin Robertson, who we had on the Final Frontier episode the other day, talking about his 1998 tour of India, the interview that Dan Brettig and Shannon Gill and I did with him back in 2021. But yeah, I have a recollection at the start of the 2000-2001 series, Kerry O'Keefe was asked for his prediction for the summer, and he said something to the effect of, you'll see Paul Wilson driving around the Wacker in a car on the final day. He goes, he'll be the international cricketer of the summer, Paul Blocker Wilson. Because that used to be the thing, you drive around in the car. And as it turned out, Blocker didn't play a single game for Australia in 2001. So it's not, Kerry doesn't get much wrong. He's a terrific fella, and glad that I think he's occasionally dipped in and out of final word stuff. Never had him on, sadly. I'd like to rectify that at some stage. But I have this lovely memory of him bigging up big Paul Blocker Wilson 25 years ago. So nice that we're able to touch on that as we get towards the end of this episode today. Baz, thank you. It's been delightful having you with us. It always is. We've got, as I say, we've got plenty coming up in the pipeline at the moment. Please get on the live shows as soon as you can. If you want to support us on Patreon, patreon.com/thefinalword. That's how we're able to make Storytime in the first place. Get you on Discord. You meet so many nice people. There's a football trip taking place this weekend, and there's meetups around the Australian summer. There'll be lots of people at the live shows. It's just been such a nourishing part of our lives, not just Storytime, but the wider community that we've developed through the Final Word. And that, of course, gets you a $5 discount on the live show tickets as well, if that's something that you're after. So all that information is in the usual place in the show notes. Buy a ticket, become a patron, back in the show, be there with us at Melbourne and around the country. We've got, trying to think what's next in the feed. If this is Storytime, you would have already heard the interview with Alex Tudor, which has gone out already. We've got a weekly show that I assume Jeff will be on, but again, I'll TBC on that next week. A couple of other quite substantial interviews that I'm going to record in England next week before I jump on the plane to Australia. And then we'll be into full-on daily mode. It'll be dailies throughout the Border Gavaskar Trophy series with Jeff and me at venue every night at Stumps. I'm sure, Bharat, you'll be involved as well in them and the weekly shows and the weekend shows, because we can't stop, we won't stop. And that's what we do here on the show. So, Baz, it's been a bloody delight. You've given me a lovely distraction across the last 70 minutes. Yeah,
well, anytime we talk about 90s tri-series cricket in Australia is the best kind of distraction, isn't it? Like, I know we're over time, but I just found this quote from Shane O'Connor because I mentioned him. And does it get more Kiwi than this from that era? I mean, we still hear Kiwi cricketers talk about this. So, he plays till the 2003 World Cup. He's still pretty young. He retires. And this is one of his quotes when he retires, and it doesn't get more Kiwi than this. Well, they ask him, why are you retiring so young? He says, I've got an opportunity to get a business up and running, and hopefully that's going to set me up for the rest of my life. I mean, doesn't get more New Zealand cricketer than...
It's like when you met with the great Chris Martin when he was running the supermarkets years later and just having his second career. So I don't suppose the riches in New Zealand cricket are quite what they are in other parts of the world. All right, Baz, let's leave it there. It's been Storytime 208. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed our weekend Storytime history show. We'll be back to do that next week as well. Have nice weekends, everybody.